it seems scripted to say, Bernie, thank you very much to come in, but because we've had that conversation. But anyway, thank you very much for being part of various events and shows and everything. So it's been really nice to host you, and we have to continue your evolution of a mediator. That will continue. The evolution keeps going on, so we'll do that. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me again. I appreciate your everything you're doing, but also that you continue to stay interested in what I have to say after hearing me so many times.
Oh, yeah, lots to, I'm sure, have conversations on. So let me just put out, this is what we're doing. So this is the World Mediators Conference and goes on till 30th June. And neutrality, polarization, and mediation. So that's what we're doing. But of course, doesn't need an introduction, but you are going to tell us about yourself, and then let's move into the topic from there, please.
Okay. Well, I have introduced myself on this forum a number of times, but just to reiterate, I have been involved in the field of mediation and conflict work since, gosh, over 40 years. And before that, I worked as a child and family therapist and in child welfare and mental health with addiction and related kind of work. But I also have a background as an activist. For many years, I was involved in anti-war movements, civil rights movement, and other environmental movements as well. I spent most of my adult life living in Boulder, Colorado, and being a partner with CDR Associates, which was and is a conflict resolution firm that works internationally. And but now I live in Southwest Ontario, in Canada, on the North Shore of Lake Erie, with my wife, Julie McFarland. My kids are scattered all over the world. Right now I'm being accompanied by my dog, Teddy, who is sitting right over there and is very tired of hearing me talk about all this stuff. You want to add anything, Vikram?
No, I think the thing is that that series, Evolution of a Mediator, people should watch that to at least understand the use of, you use the word being an activist, but what goes on behind the scenes, what all you've done, I think they should watch that. And there's a whole playlist, Bernie Mayer playlist on the channel. So there's enough information that is available, which they should watch. So, yeah.
That's right. Well, I thought I might just say that I listened. I wasn't able to listen to the whole thing, but I listened to some of Ken's talk, which is always inspiring, and his talk about the magic of mediation, which he's done a lot of work on. I don't use the term magic exactly because I try to make it more tangible, but there is something indescribable that often happens. And I thought maybe I would try to put this in a little bit of that context, what I want to talk about today, which is that I think a lot of what people who work on conflict try to do and do, and people who work on peace building try to do and do, is to take a situation which seemingly has polarized forces or opposite forces that you have to that seem contradictory to each other, and they do something to make them both happen, and also to underscore the dependence of one force on the other, that you can't have one with the other. And perhaps the most obvious one that I think many of us are aware of is a tension between cooperation and competition. And that I think many times we see cooperation and competition as you have to move from one to the other. You have to move from competition to cooperation, that our job is to de-escalate competition and promote cooperation. And there's an element of that that's true. But we also have to help people compete. And we can't genuinely help people cooperate if we can't also help them compete. And competition itself requires cooperation. So there's a paradox there, and I've written about that, and we know we have talked about that before, that I think is very familiar to people in our field. but that it's that sort of thing that I think is critical to what we do. What I want to talk about today is the concern in our world and in our field about polarization. And I don't know what this is like for you in India, but I bet you it's true there too, that people bemoan how hard it is to get much done because of all the polarization that exists. They certainly do that in the US and in Canada and Great Britain, Australia, places I've been to recently and or live in. And there is this natural tendency to say polarization is the problem. We have to stop all this polarization. And I want to argue that polarization is not the problem. Polarization is a symptom. Polarization is a issue that has to be dealt with. It does create people's having a harder time sitting down and working through issues. But if we think polarization itself is a problem rather than a reflection of more underlying problems, we are going to be seriously misled, I think. So I think there is a paradox here that to a significant degree, the road through polarization is not simply de-escalation, but to some extent it's escalation as well. It's not just kind of being nice or holding on to our tendency to get really stroppy and angry and defensive about stuff and to instead just be really good listeners, but it's to actually say ever more clearly what it is we really need and what's really important to us, and to help other people say that in a way that's often ups the level of tension, but that is a necessary step on the path through conflict and the path that leads to polarization, and the problem that leads to polarization. So that's what I want to unpack today. I might start out by reading a quote that you've heard me before, Vikram, but it is very important to me and to how I think about a lot of this. It comes from a John Lewis, who was a civil rights activist and an associate of Martin Luther King, who was brutally beaten, almost killed in a famous march in the civil rights movement in the U.S. In Selma, Alabama, and then later on became a U.S. congressman and was for many years a real voice of morality and of progressive thinking in Congress, but always in a way that he was always true to his own beliefs, but and spoke then clearly. But he also won the respect of colleagues on all sides of the aisle. And he died a couple of years ago. And he said, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." And I think we have to respect that in our work. We have to respect the importance of people getting into necessary trouble and not be so concerned about polarization that everything we do is to try to make it hard for people to do that. So let's talk a little about all where we've heard all the concerns about polarization and where that comes from. And I'd love to hear what other people might be hearing about this as well. But I hear it particularly in the United States right now, people bemoaning the fact that people are getting further and further divided, that they don't speak to each other. They don't even have social relationships as much as they used to across differences. They go to different churches based on political, in a way that's correlated with political beliefs, where they live, the schools their kids go to, even the baseball teams they play on, or whatever sport they might be involved in. But we hear that not just in the U.S. We hear it in the United Kingdom, where it seems like there, ever since Brexit in England, and going back before that probably too, it feels like it's two countries and they don't know how to talk to each other. And we hear people speaking in similar terms in Brazil and Israel and Egypt and Ukraine, etc. And it is natural for those of us who work in this field of conflict engagement and peace building to want to do something about it. And there is a role we can play. But another paradox about the work we do is that the power we have comes to a large extent from our lack of power. That we are very, very able to work with people, partly because they don't look at us with such suspicion because we might do something that's really going to screw them over. Or and it also is true that what goes along with that, in my mind, is that the more modest we are about what we can do, the more we recognize the limits on what we can do, the more humble we are, if you want, the more we can do. But if we go out there and we try to transform the world, then we're not going to transform the world. Which is, by the way, on an aside, one of my real concerns about transformative mediation, which is very popular. And I have certainly seen moments of transformation happen in mediation. And I think some of the ideas and tactics the transformative mediation movement has brought forth are very good. But I have yet to see transformation happen because I was trying to make it happen. It happened. It's like the joke about mediators, was really originally about therapists, but how many mediators does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is only one, but that light bulb has to really want to change. So, it's natural, as I say, for us to want to do something about polarization, and there is something we can do. It's not always obvious exactly what that is. It's not just by facilitating dialogues, although that is something we can sometimes do. But there is stuff we can do. But if we are going to really do something, we have to realize that what is required to deal with the problems that are underlie polarization, the structural sources that keep people apart, or that divide people, or that make people distrust each other. That what is required is much more than love, much more than good communication, much more than creative problem solving. And although all of those things are great, it is an ability to look at in a hopeful but realistic way the essential problems that make people feel alienated from their societies, that make people turn to authoritarian leaders in order to look for solutions that they don't think a more democratic process can produce, that make people want to turn and say the problem is not the structure of the system we live with and what we need to do about it, but it's those other people. And I was thinking, as I was thinking about this, of all the cultural messages we get, and I have to now speak for my own culture, but you can fill in the blanks from yours, that say it's really all we need to do is smile on our brothers, everybody get together, gotta love one another right now, to quote an old song from the 60s or early 70s in the US. And all the messages say all you need is love, or all we are saying is give peace a chance, or some other lovely sentiment that basically says it's on us to just find that within ourselves, to appreciate, to honor, to respect, to love our enemies, and to turn the other cheek. And I don't mean to say there isn't truth there. There is truth there, but it's not the whole truth. It's only part of it. And without the other part, we will fail to face the real problems that cause polarization. Now, that part is also carried by many cultural messages. The part that says we have to sort of create forces to change systems that that create domination, that create oppression, that ravage the planet, that create gross inequality of income, that create authoritarian. We have to authoritarianism that stay in power by promoting the most nationalist interests of one element in a society over another. And there are cultural messages that say, we have to be able to speak out against that too. And again, I have to speak for my own culture here for a moment. But I'm going to do one thing here. Hang on. Okay. I needed to have that. Sorry. So I think in my culture, I think from the civil rights movement, some of the songs about, many of which come from the gospel music of the African American community, but such as I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep right on a walking, keep right on a talking, marching on to freedom land, or solidarity forever, or we shall not be moved. These are also not the whole truth, but they're also an important part, because they say, hey, part of what needs to happen to deal with a lot of the problems we face is not just smiling on our brother, not just love, but standing up and being with fortitude and being firm and being sure of ourselves and developing our ability to promote change and to maximize our power in the face of other kinds of power. So I feel like all the particular focus, it just says polarization is the real problem, pretty much misses the point in many ways. Not saying it's not a problem, but is not but focusing simply on that as the major problem is to some extent a dead end. So let me just say some of the things I've heard, almost literally. These are not just the people I've heard and people talk to me, but they've been written in conflict resolution publications on websites, and they become a part of a lot of the conversation that's going on in that community in North America. So here's one, I'm literally quoting here. Polarization is the biggest problem we face in our world, bigger than poverty, racism, climate change, war, misogyny. Why? Wait, this one is a paraphrase. I apologize, but it's pretty close to what was said. Why is it the biggest problem? Because unless we come together to work on our problems, we can't solve them. In other words, unless we succeed in working in our problems, we can't work on our problems. I mean, it almost feels tautological to me. Or a variation on that, and this is a direct quote: escalation is the most dangerous force on our planet. It drives hatred. It drives wars. It drives genocide. It could start a nuclear war that would end most life on Earth. And again, to me, that sounds like saying, the biggest cause of world hunger is that people aren't eating enough food. Or say that destructive conflict is the most destructive force in the world. And another thing I've heard people say is mediators are more needed than ever. We are key to counteracting these problems. And to be able to do so, we must at all costs maintain our neutrality. Now, this to me violates the principle that I think is key, that in order to be effective, we had to realize the limit of our effect. I've heard variations on this forever, in which it says, whenever there's a big public conflict, you name it, what we need is more mediation. Well, there's no question we need more mediation. But I don't think mediation is going to solve a lot of the major public conflicts, independent of a lot of other things happening. And one variation on this, and I don't know if you've heard this yourself, but I've heard this at least 30 years in conferences I've gone to, saying, we aren't used enough. Mediators are not used enough, and it's because we don't market it well enough. We just need to market better. We need to be that because mediation is so important and it's such a natural thing and people need it so much. And people, we often used to say, well, maybe mediation may be far more needed than there is a market for it. And what I started asking quite a few years ago is, I don't think it's about marketing. I think the problem is about we're not providing what people need on some fundamental level, or at least what they need beyond the fairly narrow ranges within which we work. Now, let me just say, that was a major reason I wrote a book, came out in 2004, called Beyond Neutrality, Confronting the Crisis and Conflict Resolution. It's because I thought we, as people who are trained in conflict, are committed to dealing with it in a more constructive and a more powerful way, needed to ask ourselves some more fundamental questions, such as, what is it that people need that we are not providing? And can we provide it in some better way? And my conclusion from it was, there are two fundamental things that, yes, the answer is there are things we can do, but there's two fundamental things we have to move beyond, committing ourselves to as the only approach we take. And that is to think the only role we can play is as third-party neutrals. That's not the only, that's the role we need to play. That's what people really want and what people really need. And instead, we need to have a much broader spectrum of roles that we can play that include things such as coaching, advocacy, system design, community organizing. These are all examples of roles that we can talk about. Another place where a person has written somewhat about this in a slightly different way, but I think it has a lot to offer, is William Ury in the book The Third Side, where he talks about a much broader view of what third-siders are. I would say sometimes we should be the first or second side if we really want to help with conflict, but I think a lot of what he said gets at some of the same stuff. And so the other conclusion I made in 2004 was that we have to look at our role beyond helping people resolve conflict. And you know, that stuff I've written about quite a bit since, as you know. It's true that sometimes what people want us to do is resolve their immediate conflict, and there's nothing wrong with trying to help them do it. But if we really want to be players on the most important conflicts of our time, then we have to get beyond a fixation on seeing our value is and our prestige and how good we are as how many resolutions we've hammered out. I've been I've been very suspicious of people who say you should trust me and hire me because I have a 98% resolution rate. I don't think 98% of the conflicts that come in front of us should be resolved. And even the ones that should be and can be resolved we also have to pay attention to the ongoing element of the conflict that won't be resolved, that will be ongoing. And if I don't care if you're talking about divorce or an important community conflict or an organizational issue or global climate change. We have to be prepared for long-term conflict and help try to make that conflict both sustainable and as constructive as possible, but still allow it to play out in a powerful way if we really want to be players on those. So that was my view then. And yeah, I've moderated some elements of it since then, but that's pretty much what I still think. And so I think the advice to people that just falls on the side of saying we need to reach out to others, we need to connect with people who are different from us, we need to hear them, we need to be careful how we say what we say, we need to always respect the other people we're talking with, is again, there's truth in a lot of that, but it's really only a partial truth. And to just focus on that is very similar to telling victims who are subject to oppression to not be uppity, don't stir the pot, act in a ladylike manner, or turn the cheek at all costs. And this is the kind of advice that has been given to people for generations. I mean, it's the slaves in the United States were told, don't, just got to accept your lot here on earth because there'll be a pie in the sky by and by. Or as a famous American leftist said in the turn of the 19th century, don't believe it, it's a lie. So that's my concern about what we're dealing with. That's my concern about the nature of the problem. But I think I think we can deal with that by facing the fundamental problems that underlie polarization. And we need to look at its many causes. And we also need to look at the deeper problems it may be a symptom of. And I think conflict professionals and peace builders can be an important part of that, because I do think we have the analytical tools, and we use them often to say, so what's beneath it? What's beneath this? What's driving the underlying motivation? Or as we might say, if polarization is the position people are taking, what are their interests? What are their real concerns? And if mediation is our position, what are our interests? So I'd like to offer 10 principles for understanding and responding to polarization and escalation as we see them, because I think we can and we should. So let me kind of walk our way through that and talk about what that means. Maybe we do. The first is what I've been harping on already today, and that is, don't mistake the symptom for the problem. Sometimes all we can do is treat the symptom, whether we're talking about conflict or a disease. But if we fail to understand and address the more foundational problems, in the long run, we increase polarization and destructive conflict. The second principle is that listening is the easy part. Not that it's easy. Listening to people we really disagree with can be really challenging. Listening for what they're really saying, rather than for what we think they're saying, can be really challenging. And listening through some pretty hostile and confrontative and aggressive language can be really difficult. But it's still the easy part, in my view, because we kind of know how to listen. Much harder than that is creating a two-way street of communication, where we're not just listening, but we're also talking. we're also speaking our truth or helping other people to do it. And we're helping people, and we're speaking with power, because reaching out across our differences to understand and create ties and to humanize each other, and when possible, solve problems is important, but it has to be, in the end, a multi-sided effort. It cannot be performative listening. It cannot be listening because we just think that's the right thing to do. It has to be where we also learn to say what we have to say, or help other people say what they have to say, with power, with authenticity, with transparency, but hopefully in a way that other people can hear it. And that's why I sometimes think the most important role we can play in reaching across very powerful differences is to reach across them ourselves, is to be part of an effort to talk to people who we really disagree with, maybe about some important things, or we cannot understand why they're taking the views they're taking. But we don't do it in a way, but we also talk about our views. And we do it in a way that keeps the conversation going, if at all possible. So as important as sometimes facilitating interactions of others are, becoming players in these interactions is very important. And that to me means connecting with allies and being part of that effort, the effort those people might want to have to interact with others. So maybe use a little trivial example from my own life recently. One of the things I have written about, but I've also tried to experience personally myself, is what's going on for Trump with these Trump supporters. How can people support Trump? What's going on with the Make America Great Again crowd, who seem to be supporting awful things, racist, misogynist, and their process is just awful, overthrowing the government, and that makes me want to really listen and hear in their own language how some Trump supporters feel and experience their reality. And of course, there's all sorts of things you can read about this. But what's also really interesting is for me to sit down and interact with somebody who has those views. So I recently had that opportunity on an interpersonal level with a group of guys I sometimes get together with. And there was somebody who was newly joining the group who made it very clear that he thought Trump was kind of a great human being. And everybody else I was with, this being Canada, wanted to run away from that conversation as quick as they could. But I said, and I sort of said, no, I didn't. I tried to stay with it, despite the fact that I was being a little obnoxious in how he was presenting it. And in other words, he wasn't just saying what he thought. He was saying, oh, you can't possibly believe, you're not one of these people who think the election was not stolen. You're not naive enough to possibly think that. You're not that big a fool. It was that kind of conversation. But I hung in there and I said, well, yeah, I guess I am that big a fool. I, asked him a little bit more, and I said a little bit more. And there was a joking element to this. People were drinking beer while they were talking about it. So I joked around a little too, but I also tried to stay with it. And I could just tell people wanted to run out of the room. So I stopped eventually. And it really made me aware of the pressure on us not to do that in some way. Well, at a later iteration of a similar group of people, overlapping group, that particular person wasn't there, but somebody else was expressing very views that I think most of the people in the group disagreed with pretty strongly about abortion. And he was talking about how he has to shut up when he says some of the stuff he thinks in another group he's part of, because they're all much more liberal than him. I said, well, do you think you have to shut up here? And he said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, I don't think you have to shut up, but none of us have to shut up. Let's see if we can talk about it. And we did. And it was mixed in with some joking and some personal, affirmations. But it went on. This conversation went on for an hour. And at the end, I said, well, we did all right with that, didn't we? And everybody said, yeah, now can we go home or something like that? But I think it's hard, but I think it's one of the things that we can offer and we can encourage others to do. So that was the second one. Listening is the easy part. My third principle is that story sharing is essential. It's essential to connecting across our differences. Hearing other people's stories, encouraging genuine storytelling, and telling our stories is key, as is hearing other people's. And it's about showing who we are. And as such, it is making us vulnerable because we're not just making our case. We're telling a little bit about ourselves. When powerful storytelling occurs, and it is across differences, and people really hear each other's stories, almost inevitably, some of the interpersonal polarization breaks down. Not necessarily that suddenly people don't agree with each other, but it does break down. And yet there are a lot of cultures of problem solving that say, hey, we don't have time for this. We don't have time for this kind of storytelling. I recall a time I did a mediation with a partner between a large Native American group and a large corporation. And they couldn't have been culturally more different. What would happen is that the First Nations group would talk about their culture and their cultural history and what had happened and how important it was to honor that history and what their own personal experiences were, and their own personal experience seemed to go back several generations. And if you've ever been part of a talking circle, that's a very interesting way in which problem solving occurs by people going around the room telling stories until they keep telling stories until somehow or other they dealt with what they need to deal with. On the other side, the people from the large corporation understood that it was important to do it, but were clearly getting impatient. And they clearly wanted to start talking about what we're going to do about this. We have a business decision to make here. This is about business. And they kept on wanting to explain the benefits from the business arrangements they were proposing to the Native American group. And every time they did that, the Native American group felt like they weren't being respected. And every time the Native American group wanted to talk a little more what the meaning of this was in terms of who they were as a people, the business people said they were just delaying and playing their game and being manipulated. So they both were feeling, by their natural way of communicating, that they were disrespecting each other. And so we had to create a new story, what it's like when people try to come together across these differences that was rooted in their own story. And we didn't create it, they created it, but I pointed out the dilemma. My role was simply to point out the dilemma they were facing and say, how do you handle that? It's important to both of you, and we both need to understand this. And when you go back to your people in the corporation and say, yeah, we listened a lot to history, they probably think you're not doing much. You just and you might even get mocked for it. And if the First Nations group goes back to their people and say, yeah, we just had to listen to them say what a great business deal it was, even if it meant sacrificing some of our values, and then you would say, well, I hope you didn't do that. You're not a turncoat. So, it was that kind of storytelling and story creation that was key. So my fourth principle is neutrality is a false flag. It's a chimera. It's an avoidance. And a misleading concept. And obviously, my last book, with Jackie Funk Guzman, The Neutrality Trap, Disrupting and Connecting for Social Change, is about that. And you have a whole recording of Jackie and I talking to you about that. It's not what fosters trust. It's not what brings about genuine connection. That doesn't mean that a process-focused facilitator should not be part of the process. It's often helpful to be process-focused facilitators, and it's not always all about us. But I don't know any place where trust comes from saying, you can trust me because I'm a neutral. And in fact, what we mean by neutrality is very confused. And and to a large extent, it's not something we can deliver. We all come with human beings with our own values and beliefs. We may have an aspiration not to push one party's interests at the expense of another, and that's fine. That's a good aspiration if we're in the role of facilitating everybody's discussion. But everything we do pushes one party's interests at the expense of another. We all have biases, and and whether they're explicit or implicit, they show. Every time we try to frame a conflict in a particular way, it has an impact on what happens. And in fact, I think so this is my fifth principle, that trust comes from authenticity and transparency. If we do what we say we're going to do, if we follow through, if we're honest about the difficulties we face and about where we're coming from without necessarily making it all about us, if we say difficult things in a humane way and with enough uncertainty that we're not sure we're always right, that's what helps connect with people over time. And it's the over time part that is critical here if we want to deal with it. A lot of our work is one-time only interactions with people, but if we really want to deal with polarization, it's not usually a one-time interaction. So the sixth principle then is genuine connection is about change. Genuine connection should never come at the price of reinforcing oppression, inequality, or depredation. So we have to understand, whenever we say to people who are developing social movements, what you need to do is sit down and talk with the people who you disagree with. After George Floyd was murdered in the United States by the Minneapolis police, a lot of people are saying what's needed is police community dialogue. And of course that was needed at the right time. But what was also needed was a more powerful movement to develop. And that was something that needed to occur in order for the kind of connection to occur that could be meaningful. And let me just leave it at that. There's stories we could tell about it. And then the seventh principle, which comes from that, is that disruption is essential for dealing with destructive conflict. That's why the subtitle of our book is Disrupting and Connecting for Social Change. Because the irony here, the paradox here is, without disrupting systems that promote oppression, genuine connection doesn't tend to occur either. And so let me go on here. We could talk more about that, but again, I've written a whole book about it and talked about it in a previous issue. And then I'd say escalation is, I would not ever say escalation is the biggest problem we face. Escalation is a necessary force for change. A lot of what we have to do in conflict to get through it is to help people escalate it in as productive a way as possible. Now, that doesn't mean all escalation is good. There can be out of control, out of bounds, crazy escalation that is really destructive, such as I think we have seen in the Ukraine. But on the other hand, genuine change in dealing with the forces underlying polarization is very seldom pretty or nice. It is not always peaceful. It is not always organized. It is often a result of spontaneous reaction to a precipitating event that gives voice to a real underlying problem. And sometimes that leads to progress. And sometimes it leads to temporary progress and setbacks as the system fights back. That's what I think happened with the Arab Spring, where there was a precipitating event in Tunisia when a vendor set himself on fire, and it set riots and movements up all across Northern Africa. And for a while, it looked like there would be some real change, but the system fought back. And that's sad, but that's the way change happens too. It's not going to happen without some of that. It also requires working with across our differences. So that, to me, is an important principle as well. And a ninth principle is we have to stay with conflict. This gets back to what I said earlier. Focusing too much on immediate and resolutions can prolong conflict and is a way of maintaining the status quo often. Again, people want us to resolve conflict. We have to help with that, but we also have to know that the most important conflicts we face aren't going to go away. And that we have to approach that reality with both optimism and realism, which is another paradox. Both require the other, which is to say that we have to be realistic that real change is hard to come by, but we have to be optimistic that the arc of history bends towards justice, but it's a long arc. And the final principle is one coming from theory of nonviolence, that all of our adversaries are also potential allies. If we can approach each other in a way that people who we disagree with, as in my little personal example, in a profound way, is that people who, are human beings, are, with all their flaws and good points, as all the rest of us have, and that sometimes, sometimes you better edit that out, but sometimes our best, our most important allies are people who were not always allies, but were at some point adversaries. So here's what I guess I would say by way of conclusion. Talk with those we disagree with, but this is not just about listening. Look for opportunities to bring people together, but not just for one-time feel-good events in an ongoing way. Go beyond crazy, stupid, and evil. And what I mean by that is, it's very easy when we see people we disagree with to say they, like in my case, the MAGA crowd, the Trump supporting crowd, that these people are just stupid, crazy, and evil, or as Hillary Clinton said, the deplorables. But there's stupid, crazy, and evil everywhere on all sides of all issues, and it doesn't explain why some things really take root or not. And I think the best way of understanding some of the most horrendous events that have ever happened is to say, try to explain it without relying on that. Slavery, or in my case, as you know, I'm a son of Holocaust survivors and grandson of Holocaust victims. How do you explain the Holocaust without saying it's all because these crazy, stupid, or evil people? There were crazy, stupid, and evil people involved there, but there always are. And why did that one happen? And why did it? And my father used to always say, "What happened in Germany could happen any place." I never would have thought in my earlier life that that democracy was in the United States would be so fragile as I now think it is. But there are reasons for that, and it's not. And I think those reasons stem from the fact that we have very massive problems that people aren't convinced democracy is dealing with, and that makes them vulnerable to all sorts of stuff. I would say support progressive efforts to change repressive systems or the status quo that maintains them. I think that is part of what good conflict work requires. I'd say focus on how to carry on conflict over time in an effective way. Always pay attention to power differentials. Take risks to speak to those we disagree with about politics and religion, among other things. Tell our stories, listen to other people's, not just what they want. and that through all of this, self-reflection is essential. So polarization's a problem, but the way through it is much more subtle than just to say polarization is a problem. And the same for escalation, dealing with the difficult conflict. So that's what I have to say this morning. I'd love to hear, I don't know if we have other people who are in on the conversation at this point, but I'd certainly love to hear what you have to say and thoughts, Vikram, and anybody else who wants to chime in.
Yeah, whoever's listening can always put their comments in the chat. But look, for me, I'm telling you, everyone does use this term. I mean, they use the term democracy, and you say democracy is fragile. I'm saying democracy doesn't exist. We are fooling ourselves that democracy exists, and from there we get into this, because polarization is going to happen. Because I keep talking about the arithmetic. It's all about arithmetic. In the US, 33% of the entire votes of the country makes you the president. 37% of the people don't vote. And we say this is a democracy. I mean, there it is about 33 and 32% competing with each other. And you were saying that 33% of the entire votes of the country, and we call ourselves a democracy. India, it's 25% of the entire votes of the country. And we keep saying we're the largest democracy and all that. I think we're fooling ourselves, because the thing is, let's go back to the colonization, divide and rule, because that's the only way you can rule. With I give that example. 5,000 bureaucrats, British bureaucrats, are ruling over 300 million people. That time we were 300 million. We are not right now. We've become the most populated. We're now more than 1.4 billion. But
congratulations.
Yes, we won. But just imagine, how do you do that? And similarly, that has just been taken forward and new governments came up, but no one wants to address it, because how do you get a majority of the entire population together? Then you'll have to be reasonable. You can divide, get the arithmetic together, that how do I add up to 33, in our case 25? How do we break them up into caste, into religion? Let's do that. In the case of the US, it would be color, maybe, whatever other way. You'll keep dividing them. So everyone is just a one sum in that entire whole, that arithmetic part of it. So I think that's where, for me, polarization is going to happen up till we keep fooling ourselves that we've got this structure, that, oh, we've got democracy, now there is polarization happening because of individuals. No, it's the structure itself has to create that. And that's the only way that structure is going to continue, because you want someone up there ruling. I'm not saying ruling, because that's what it is for me. 33% cannot mean democracy, cannot mean that. So no, it's not blaming any individual, not at all. I don't even want to get into it, because if you are part of a system, you have to run the system that way, and you have to divide. And how you do it, on what basis you do it, will keep changing. And I don't know what someone else will come up with, but it is going to be the basic aspect of what we call and fooling ourselves on democracy. I mean, your thoughts on that?
Well, I fundamentally agree with you saying we're not genuinely a democracy. I think there are systems that allow for more diversity of input and voices, and that does have an impact on what happens. And there are systems where that is less the case. But there's so many structures throughout American history that have said, yeah, you can have a voice if you're a white property-owning male. That was the original, and then eventually we opened it up a little bit. But the way it's structured, even of the people who do vote, the state of Wyoming, which has 500 and some thousand people, gets 2 members of the U.S. Senate, which is a very powerful body in the United States. And California, with some 40 million people, gets 2 representatives in the U.S. Senate. That the last time a Republican won the popular vote, even amongst those who run, was in the second George Bush election, in 2000. Whenever that was, 2004. And he didn't get most of the popular vote in 2000, and no other Republican has gotten it since, although there have been a lot of Republicans run. There was Trump running. There was Bush won the first term, and it doesn't seem to matter. So that's one of the problems. People often feel they don't have a voice, and the only way they can have a voice is through organizing disruptive actions, if you want to call it that. But the other part of the problem is that this system, authoritarian or whatever it is, does not seem able to deal with whether it's democracy or whatever systems we've created. And let's not call it democracy. Let's call it where people think they have a voice because they think they have a vote. They aren't dealing with the fundamental problems we face. They're not capable of it because we don't know how to deal with it. We don't know how to deal with climate change. We don't know how to deal with the things we could do. We don't have the knowledge for how to deal with the power dynamics behind why there's such growing inequality. It doesn't mean nothing can be done, but as long as people experience their future, their livelihood and their kids' livelihood decreasing in potential, they're going to find somebody to blame, and they're going to be easily to be manipulated in that way. So,
and I also
kind of what I think, but I wouldn't say it's all the same. I mean, I do think that there is something different about feeling like you can speak with great opposition to the government, and there are ways of having some voice in government, and that's not something you can do in many parts of the world. You certainly can do it in Canada. It happens all the time. Whether that makes a difference and how people feel about it is another story.
But also the other part is that you hear the number of people who represent the entire country. I mean, those numbers are so. I mean, we look 1.4 billion people in our parliament. We have 545 in what we call the Lok Sabha, which is the one part of the parliament. The other one, we have some 230 something. So this is representing 1.4 billion people. I think maybe the structure needs to be re-looked at. But I mean, we can keep talking about that. For me, the solution, of course, lies in where do the mediators come in and where does mediation come in? Is that world mediation?
Where do you think mediation comes in?
This is where that world mediation circle that I'm trying to create, that you have to create when you spoke about conversations, because it's all about conversation. So I said, let's create these spaces in every community, every school, college, organization, where people who want to have conversations first come together. It might be a small group, doesn't matter. We have to give an alternative to politics, advocacy, and activism. There has to be a space which doesn't have all that as part of it. Let those few people come together. That group will keep growing, and this is where that mediator comes in, who is actually going to be the one who the circle is created around. Maybe you need those people, but those are going to be identified in those spaces who are people who have that mindset. And let's start that process at the grassroots level, because getting communities together, you also spoke about something about communities and bringing communities together. Bringing them together seems to be now the biggest challenge I think you need to do, because you've divided them so much and that's polarization has happened, and now you have to put them together. Someone has to put it together. It's going to be slow. It's going to be a slow process, but someone has to stick to it and keep doing that. And let's see, because on the other end, you are going to have people who will keep dividing, because that's, like I said, that's part of the structure. They're not wrong. How do we blame them? You've created that as your structure. So they will keep doing that. On the other end, you'll have to get people to put them together. So it's not going to be easy. And on the other side, yes, there is a lot. There's power already. There is money, everything there. So all that is going to be something which will make it difficult. But that's okay. But what I need to do, Bunny, is bring people's comments in. Let me first bring that in, and then we go into what. Let's just have a look at what we have here. We have Dr. Mohammed Lazizi. Many thanks, dear Vikram, for your kind invitation. Congratulations to the speakers for the excellent presentation. All the best for continued success. Giovanni, Mohammed is in Morocco. Giovanni is in Italy. Thanks, Professor, for the invitation. Okay, Eunice, of course, she's in Nigeria. So real, relatable, enlightening. Thank you for sharing with us. I missed this number 7 to 9. This session is a must-watch to all participants in the dispute resolution industry. Okay. Alex says, wonderful commentary. Thank you, Bernie. And thank you especially for showcasing your example of Trump supporters. The example is lively and relatable. I'm curious to know, given that this work is tremendously hard and some model support and encouragement makes a huge difference in sustaining healthy conflict, how can we showcase and celebrate healthy conflict? And also add that, okay, maybe we'll get that addition later. Yes, Bernie, what do you?
We don't go ahead. You can finish
Okay,
if you
I'd
want.
also add that based on my research into polarization, there is an inherent component of epistemology in polarization, in short, because there are questions that cannot be fundamentally answered, and also because we often have to make decisions with incomplete information. We will always find ourselves polarized epistemologically. Knowledge is literally impossible on the matter, at least for the time being, and this polarization not even social or political yet. This epistemic component may serve as a layer to fuel further polarization. You want to keep that? Yep.
Yeah. All right. Let me just say something about the last one. You may have to remind me about the one before. That's really interesting. I'd love to hear more about the research on epistemological polarization. However, I also would say that epistemology is not is a power. The creation of language and the meaning of language is very much rooted in power structures, and we see that in cultural ways all the time. And so we have often faced not just an epistemology of polarization, but an epistemology of power and oppression. And it's very, very hard often to come up with a language that embraces true equality or speaks to the real problems we face in an effective way. But I think that's just a really interesting comment. What was the one before that? I'm sorry, I wanted to.
Well, before that, it was just nice things.
No, there was one.
For Alec only, for Malik?
Yeah.
Given that this work is tremendously hard and some moral support and encouragement
Right.
makes a huge difference in sustaining healthy conflict, how can we showcase and celebrate healthy conflict?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things I talked about, I think it was 7 essentials for staying with conflict, and one is sustaining people through conflict. And sustaining people with conflict requires support systems, the opportunity for people to tell their stories. Most very effective political movements have had small group structures in which people could come together and tell their stories in some way or another. And that is a way of celebrating healthy conflict as well. You know, one way is to look culturally at how we talk about conflicts in our past. And one of the interesting problems is we often create a story in which conflict is terrible, awful things happen, and then some hero savior comes through and does something decisive, and everything turns right. I think more interesting stories are not the ones that rely on hero figures, but rely on the actions of people and groups. And there are stories of stuff like that. I mean, when we tell the story of the civil rights movement, it's easy to focus on, Dr. King and Ella Baker and a few other, very influential people. But it's really a story of lots of people seizing opportunity on local levels and telling those stories, looking at the very small work that was done on very local levels that actually were part of a larger effort. These are stories that need to be told, both in writing and in journalism and in drama, and they sometimes are.
So basically, whatever you're saying goes down to my world mediation circle and some mediation circles, because stories are going to be told at each of those spaces, and like we can put them all out, whatever that those little stories can be put out there.
Let me ask you something about that, because I think that's a great thing. And yet, unless these circles deal with genuine power issues, and understand that part of what needs to happen is that people need to be helped to develop their own power and the structures of movements that can change. Then they're not going to really change the fundamental dynamic, I think. So how do you see that happen?
Well, the thing is that first of all, there has to be something that you achieve in terms of resolution of something. It's going to be a small step. So right at the basic level, some things might not have so much of that power on the other side, because there might be something very simple, basic, where people can agree on things, get together, maybe at a community level, something very simple. I'm saying it can be the simplest of things, doesn't matter. It has to be that experience of coming together to resolve something. So first step is going to be that don't take up those where there are vested interests, huge vested interests, because those have been created over time. And of course, money and power and everything has gone behind it. And like I said, the structure has done that. The structure has created those things. Otherwise, it should have been a more broad-based kind of thing, but it's not been created. Doesn't matter. Let's not fight systems. Let's not fight that. Those will change as they have to change. But on this end, little successes, very simple ones. When this group gets together, group becomes bigger because you've got those successes. People accept the process, they use the process, things grow bigger. As they keep growing bigger, because it's all about, again, numbers, and when numbers are on your side, things become even better at the little larger issues. And that's how, from the grassroots, you keep creating these, they grow bigger. It's not going to happen very fast. I'm not saying it's going to happen very fast. If it does, damn good, because of course it's going to be one of those things which can just, I mean, you just put it out and it multiplies, 10 get in 10, and those get in 10, and then things can expand. But whatever time it takes, it doesn't matter about time. It's the fact of actually putting something together, for which the most important part is finding those people with that mediator mindset. Everything starts from there. And because they've been sidelined over years, over hundreds of years maybe, because colonization had affected that. In India, it's affected it. Similarly, it would have happened everywhere. So those people with that wisdom were sidelined, because wisdom should not play a role, because here you're trying to polarize. Wisdom should not come in the way. So you have to sideline wisdom. So wisdom has been sidelined over hundreds of years. Now you have to bring those people in, because wisdom is going to be there. It's going to be there. You can't remove wisdom. You can remove the people with the wisdom. So let's get those people out. So first thing is, starting point is identifying those people, bring them out, and create those circles around them. And I'm saying, according to me, when those conversations happen, it's going to be all about conversations. So people who can facilitate those conversations and bring those stories out. And today we have technology in our hand. Let's put those things out all there. Why can't we have that one community sitting together trying to resolve that little issue, not be available on YouTube Live? Why not? Let them put it out there. Let them have their own community YouTube channel to put it out, and anyone watch it. So I think that's what is going to happen, because one little success watched by people around the world will give them that very basic confidence and faith in the process. And then it moves on. So technology is going to be something very important in the whole process to bring it out. And simple technology. There's nothing major to it. Everyone has a phone. Everyone has a little stand to put the phone, and you've got internet connectivity, and you can be watching something happening in any corner of the world. If you can watch TikTok videos, I think you might want to watch a community successfully resolving something. And I'm saying it could be the simplest of things. Doesn't matter. Just do it and then grow. My thoughts.
Great.
We are going to keep refining it as we go along.
Well, good luck with it. That sounds like a really important effort, and hope it works. I have the experience I've had of where we really have been able to empower people by bringing them together has been in small groups and on specific issues that then related to larger issues, such as the work I did in Bulgaria that I think I talked to you about before, between the Roma, Turkish and Slavic population. Well,
so you have to be part. Yeah, you have to be part of this too. You have to give more time to this too. Well, let's get these people together. Then I'll bring you in. You can take them. First of all, you have to hear their stories and what they've done, and we'll keep letting it grow as we go along.
Good. I look forward to that.
So what I need to put up there, Bernie, before you leave, is that what are those various shows that are available on your playlist? Let's just have a look at that. So we've done 4 episodes of Evolution of a Mediator. Then we've done the talking books with you and Jackie. Then you've done that heart, soul, spirituality.
Uh-huh.
Then Mediators, Mediation, Neutrality as part of the World Mediators Conference last year. And then, of course, the symposium on neutrality and mediation, and now this conference. So all this is there. Please watch it. Bernie has taken out time to put all this wisdom out there. The wisdom has to be out there. We need to see, everyone has to know that people like you exist and they're out there, and get them out, value them. That's what the most important part, I think, is.
Good.
So
Thank you very much, and thanks for doing this.
thank you very much for being part of all this, and of course, hoping that we can get you involved in your busy schedule to get involved in more of these activities. Now it's going to be more about, actually, like I keep saying, World Mediation Circle and bringing those people out. So events, we've done lots of them. There's enough content out there, almost 600 videos to watch. So
yeah.
So thank you, Bunny. Thanks a lot. And
Take
we'll,
care.
yeah, we have to, of course, schedule your evolution of a